Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to give it just a second while we get people hopping on. Really excited. I always think this is our best presentation of the year, so you picked a good night to join us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are recording. As usual, if you have any questions, if you could put them in the chat, and Kelly and I will be monitoring the chat towards the end of the evening. We'll let the panel go through their questions, but then they'll take questions from the audience. And we do have interpretation. We are recording. We'll be sending out the recording tomorrow. And I think that's our usual. I think you guys, most of you have been joining us. So I think you know how this works. But welcome, welcome, welcome. And Stephen asked, where are you joining from? He's joining from Orange County. So if everybody could just put maybe what city or county they're from, we will get started. Great question, Stephen. All right, I think it's slowing down. Hi, Andrew, nice to see you. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I know we've got a lot to cover tonight. So welcome everybody. My name is Beth Burt. I'm the Executive Director for the Autism Society Inland Empire. Proud parent of a young man with autism and another young man who has some mental health challenges. Love being part of this community, and I'm so glad you joined us tonight. Oh, I see Ivy, I see people from LA County. If you get a chance, just throw up in the chat where you're from. We are recording tonight. We will be sending it out tomorrow. We do have interpretation available. And if you have any other questions, just put them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Lindenberg. Kelly is one of our fabulous board members, as well as the chair of our panel of advisors, and lucky enough that I can call her a friend, hopefully. She is a well-known speaker nationally and internationally, and she's put together a great panel for you guys tonight. So I'm going to go dark. I will be here, but I'm going to let Kelly facilitate the panel with her usual flair and just insight, and I know you guys are in for a great treat tonight. So thanks for joining us, and Kelly, I'm gonna let you take it away.
All right, hi everyone, and welcome. We're really happy to be here and have a chance for people with autism to be heard. We have a lot to teach, so I'm really glad you're able to join us here today. As Beth said, I'm Kelly Lindenberg. I'm an occupational therapy assistant, an assistive technology specialist in Riverside, California. And I also work for the REACH Autism program. So I'm happy to be here today to do this panel. Thomas, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Thomas Cameron Stewart. I'm 37 years old, and I am currently taking classes at a program called JDS Creative Academy, which is known as JDS Studios.
Great. Stephen, you're next on my window. You want to go?
I'm a self-advocate. I'm an international speaker about autism and disability. I'm also a PhD student at Chapman University in my dissertation stage, and I'm probably in about next year I'll probably have my doctorate degree.
Great, that's awesome, Stephen. Bill, you're next.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Bill. I am an occupational therapist. So I've been working in 10 years in LA County. And I also personally have a doctorate. I have a clinical doctorate in occupational therapy. And I also speak a lot domestically and internationally in occupational therapy. And another kicker is that I also am a 3-time TEDx speaker.
Great, thanks, Bill. Nick.
You're muted, Kelly.
Nick, can you hear us? All right. We'll go ahead and get started while Nick is trying to fix that connection issue. So the first question we're going to ask is, do you think autism is a disability or a difference? You know, in the neurodiverse community, there is often one opinion, and you know, in different communities in the autism world, there are different opinions. Some people say it's a difference, some say disability. For me personally, I think it is both. I think it is a difference, a different way of thinking, a different way of sensory processing the world. But it can be disabling for some individuals. And so I kind of agree with both sides of the argument. What about you, Thomas?
Well, I think it's both a disability and a difference. I mean, my disability is learning disabilities, and the best way I learn is kind of getting a visual understanding with my eyes. And sometimes too many words verbally, it's just in one ear and out the other. But I do need some kind of verbal communication to sometimes understand it visually. But as long as the description is short and simple, it helps.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Stephen?
I wanted to say, I agree that it's both. I think in one hand that it is technically a disability because it impacts your brain, it impacts thing, but there's also a social aspect to it in the sense that you communicate differently and interact a little differently, and your spatial is a little differently, and some other things will learn a little differently than other neurotypicals, and you basically come to accept that.
Perfect, thanks. Bill?
So I guess for me, I think the other panelists already covered it, but I'm definitely more of a kinesthetic learner. Sometimes I like to learn by mistakes.
That's great, Bill. I like that. Learn by mistakes. Okay. So I think Nick is trying to rejoin us. So we'll see if he's able to make it back. So then the next question is, how would you describe your autism and what are your strengths and challenges? For me, my autism, I primarily feel like my autism is a sensory motor issue. I'm really sensitive to the world and have a difficult time processing like what's around me. Like things are too bright, things are too loud. But also I have a hard time like with a lot of motor planning issues. Like one day I can tie my shoes and then the next day I can't do it. Or one day I can, you know, cook an entire meal and the next day I can't do it because I can't organize myself enough to move around the kitchen. I felt like I had a lot more social issues when I was younger. but I think for me, it was because because I had so many sensory things and so many motor issues going on, I didn't really have the opportunity to go practice on the playground, and keep up with other kids to learn those social skills. But I don't think it was an inability of my brain to learn it. It was just, I didn't have as much chance because I was dealing with the rest of the world around me. So, would you guys describe how your autism affects you and what are your strengths and challenges? Thomas?
I guess my strengths are I can learn most art stuff visually, kind of like I can sort of figure out in a way, be able to draw things and hands-on experience. And I guess when it comes to martial arts is kind of an art in itself, only one that you use to defend yourself. But sometimes my martial arts helps me to inspire my drawings and maybe to try other things. And I guess I can sometimes sort of think outside the box, but one of my challenges is sometimes accepting a change in life or what's going to be around us. Sometimes not liking the change. And sometimes I can be very routine, which can be a problem too.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Stephen?
I had many challenges growing up. I was the kid who was chosen last on the playground. Socially, it was very challenging for me. Academically, I would learn some subjects faster than others. I was always scared of heights. I had no friends for much of my childhood. I had to changes and things are hard sometimes. I like things a certain way. There's just a lot of things that really have been challenging over the years. And one of my last challenges was going through the pandemic single and alone. And it was very depressing.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic was hard for a lot of people, Stephen. I think a lot of people are just starting to come back from that one. Especially if you were isolated and alone for a while. Bill.
All right, I guess my strengths, partly because I'm also an occupational therapist. So I know that being mentally flexible is very important.
Mhm.
I think that I sort of blend right in because I'm pretty mentally flexible. Another one is that I'm a very analytical person. So I actually like to do research as well. In terms of challenges, I would say occasionally social communication, I think many people do. And then another one is, I guess sometimes I get really stubborn.
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. Nick, can you hear us?
Your voice is still low, Nick.
I guess how it's
Oh yeah, we're still having a hard time.
okay.
Oh, yes, there you are.
Perfect.
Yeah, I've got the mic plugged in too, so
Oh, there
up
you
to
are,
the
Nick.
max.
All right, we can hear you. Do you want to go ahead
Can you
and
hear me now?
introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, before it was acting very buggy. I'm not sure why. There's lots of legs, so there's not much left. Hopefully, it'll be enough for answer questions. But allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Nick, and I've graduated at Mount Central College with an associate's degree in art technology. And my main goal is to land a job at the music industry because I make music. Because autism as a disability, I think it's more like a difference. A lot of people say it's a disability, but I don't always think that's one. It's just something that just makes me me. So it's no curse. I just think that a simple difference to thinking and speaking and just how your brain works in general.
I think that's we're about
How-
that right now, Nick.
Okay.
So we're
Yeah.
just doing one question at a
Okay,
time.
very straight.
And it's still kind of hard to hear us. So
Okay.
do you want to type your answer? Because you're breaking up a lot.
Oh, I'm really sorry, but like the laptop is like extremely buggy, so I can have a built-in camera, so it's the only one I have to deal with. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
Yeah, it's breaking up a lot. So if you could just type your answer to each question in the chat so people can hear it a little bit better.
All right. I guess I'll have to do then. All right.
Yeah, Jennifer said I think it's Wi-Fi. I think it is the Wi-Fi, or he said it's an older computer, I think he said. All right, so the next question is do you prefer to be called a person with autism or an autistic person, and why? For me, actually, I don't really care too much because kind of like I said, there's a debate within the autism community that a lot of professionals say person first language, like I am, or you put the person before the disability. So that's what a lot of professionals are taught. So you say that person has autism and you put the person. A lot of people in the neurodiversity community say autism is not separate from me. It's what makes me I am. It's not something to be ashamed of. So I am autistic. For me, because I feel like I feel like it is a challenge, and also like kind of where I said difference or disability, because I view it as both. I don't care which one I'm called, but I think just respecting whatever term that particular individual is probably the way to go for me. So Thomas, do you like to be called a person with autism or an autistic person, and why?
Well, I guess I never been called either of those in any way. So I guess, so I wouldn't know, but I guess I wouldn't be bothered. Just the one word which would be insulting for anybody with autism would be if somebody used the word retard, because that's just a big insult. Somebody with no respect and doesn't want to take the time to understand somebody's disabilities or autism.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Stephen?
It's to me, I can go either way on that. I know to me it's an individual preference among the person. And I know there's some people out there like Amy Sequenzi and others that use the identity first. I know there's some others out there that use people first, and there was just a lot of debate over that issue, but it really, I think, use what the person prefers.
Great, thanks, Bill.
I think I had evolved over time. At first, I didn't really matter, but then as I read more social media posts from the autistic community, I think I came to have a preference of having identify as autistic person. And in the occupational therapy profession as well, I know that one of the things that we're moving towards is having the profession to be more neurodiversity affirming. And it seems like it is the movement that we are trying to get more professionals in that field to be aware of that the identity first language is what the autistic community mostly preferred. But that said, I think it's important, as the other panels have said, it's important to ask each person individually if it's possible.
Yeah, I've seen a big push in the OT world as well, that of any community besides, you know, the actual autistic neurodiverse community. I see the biggest push in that profession. So that's been a great shift for our community. And Nick answered, we'll get to that when we get to some of the challenges, social questions down below. So our next question is, do you have any differences in the experience of your senses? So specifically sensitive to sounds or textures or need to move, etc. I kind of mentioned that earlier, that's one of the biggest hurdles I face. For me, you know, I can hear electricity going through the wires in the walls, and I hear clocks ticking, and I hear like the traffic outside, and I hear all these things all the time. And the worst is like any sudden sounds, which is, it startles me every single time. I'm also very sensitive to visual stimuli. I'm sensitive to lights and reflections off of, you know, different surfaces like windows and laminated objects and tile. And I also have very poor body awareness. You know, I'm always bumping into things, always dropping things, have difficulty coordinating my movements. And so the social aspect of my world is often what leads to some of the frustration and meltdowns when I was younger. So that was a big challenge to overcome. So Thomas, are you specific to, or do you have any differences in your senses?
Well, maybe sudden loud sounds can startle me, but maybe not all of them. I mean, I don't know about sounds or anything like that. I mean, I can be sensitive to bugs buzzing in my ears. That can be annoying for one thing. And as far as I sometimes walk when I need, I like to walk around when I need. Sometimes when I just can't sit down and work on something, and I just got too much energy in me, and I need to burn it off somehow by doing walks. Sometimes I need like a big round circle or something like a figure eight. As long as it's big and kind of a loop motion, it helps me. I just keep doing it until I can't do it no more.
Great, thanks, Thomas. What about you, Stephen?
Well, yes, I hear a lot of background noise. I sometimes to be sleep, sometimes I have to be quiet completely. Sometimes I hear a lot of I don't filter things out. Although it also depends on what the sound is, because sometimes I do go to arcades, and I do go to concerts, and I do go to theater shows sometimes. And sometimes when the sound is pleasant, as in like music, it's actually not that bad, as opposed to like loud, annoying sound. Sometimes I've been scared of different things sensory wise. Socially was also a challenge, and you mind if I give a couple minute answer to this, because of some of my findings from some of my first part of my dissertation? Can I share just a minute of that?
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I realized that socially there were a lot of environments that I did not understand what to do in. It's like my brain didn't infer them naturally. And later, I actually dissected the whole extracurricular realm from elementary school to graduate school in terms of what the skills were. And I realized a lot of it wasn't in the research of what I didn't pick up naturally. Like I had no friends for many years. I was a kid chosen last. There were many games I didn't understand. I didn't know when to clap in audiences. When I was younger, no one dated me. It was like, I didn't even know what dating was when I was in high school. There were just a lot of little things that I didn't understand. But later in my research, I analyzed it and I realized that the current literature mostly only covers the communication realm as opposed to the hands-on realms like recreation and leisure and the arts. In situations.
Great, thanks.
like
Thanks,
etiquette.
Stephen.
Yeah,
That's important research. I'm glad you're looking into that.
yeah.
Bill, how about you? Do you have any differences in your sensory system?
Good question. So I think I think one thing that's similar to yours. I have sometimes very poor body awareness. I notice that is like, of course, in the healthcare setting, that can be very difficult because like safety is paramount in our jobs. So therefore, like, yeah. So I think there's that one. And then I'm also a picky eater as well. So one of the quirks I have is I don't eat fruits whole, but occasionally I'll drink juice of those, like orange juice, apple juice, that kind of thing. So I guess it's like I don't like the texture of fruits. I know that in recent years, I think it's like I sort of expand my repertoire a little bit. I used to not like lobster or many other types of seafood except fish because I eat fish a lot. So I'll say food is one of them. And then occasionally I think like noise, I think, or fluorescent lights, I think that's a pretty common one for many people. So I'll go with those. Yeah, so that's mine.
Yeah, that Bill, that you made an excellent point. That's why I stay with pediatrics and ambulatory populations mostly, because transferring individuals in the in the SNFs and the hospitals was dangerous for me because I can't even manage my own body, let alone be responsible for moving other adults. So that was definitely a challenge for me too. And of course we want to keep our patients safe above all else. So Nick said answered this. He said what did he say about sensory? He said he has a keen sense of smell and good observational skills. And he said that he experiences a lot of different senses. For example, while I use white noise machine when I go to sleep, since he hears a continuous sound, it helps to calm his mind. Yeah, Nick, I actually I do the same thing. I have to have a white noise machine on to go to sleep just to help filter out some of those crickets and other noises in the background, and it helps me sleep too. So our next question, there's a big push in some parts of the community to move away from the use of the puzzle piece, and because some people feel that a puzzle piece symbol represents an incomplete person or only part of a person, while other people say no, it just represents the diversity and mystery and complexity of autism. So what is your feeling kind of about moving away from the use of the puzzle piece? For me, I'm really kind of indifferent to it. you know, as being somebody that likes routine, it's hard for me to change what I've known my whole life, right? Of that's the symbol. But also I don't want other people to be offended and feel like they are incomplete. Yeah, I don't take that personally as that the meaning for that. I take it as it just kind of the complexity and mystery of figuring out what supports each individual person, because we are all so different. So Thomas, how do you feel about going away from the puzzle piece?
Well, I'm kind of been used to this symbol. I mean, I might not care whether it changes or not, but if it does change, maybe it can still be revolving around the same puzzle piece, but as the missing piece of the puzzle. I mean, where the symbol is just showing where that same piece is an empty space within the puzzle picture, which is somehow original and new at the same time.
Great, thanks, Thomas. How about you, Stephen?
I feel like I see where they're coming from on that, but on the other hand, I don't think autism is a puzzle necessarily. I think autism is some accepting, and I see I don't know if it's be the right symbol for autism, but I do know it's long part of our history as well. So it's really something I haven't given a ton of thought to. And just wanted to clarify one thing. Just because some people are against using a puzzle piece to symbolize autism does not mean that we're against other types of puzzles or like jigsaw puzzles and stuff like that, because it's independent. This issue is independent of puzzles, and we're actually some of us autistics do like putting them together sometimes. So that when I was a kid, I actually did like putting puzzles together. So I wanted to say it's kind of like a hard thing for me. I'm kind of neutral on this one.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Bill?
So I guess it's my turn, right?
Go ahead.
I guess it's my turn, right? Is that correct? So I think I like Stephen's point about the perception of the puzzles. It's like, well, some autistic people, they do not like the puzzle piece. It's not because they don't like the act of putting puzzles together, but they just don't like it as a symbol. For me, I think I eluded it from an earlier question. So since I'm more pro neurodiversity affirming practice now, so therefore I'm more a fan of an infinity symbol as a symbol for autism instead.
Great, thanks, Bill. And Nick wrote that he doesn't feel anything from the puzzle piece since it did not make much of an impact on him personally. He does not fully understand the puzzle, so it could be another reason. And yeah, Stephen, puzzles were one of my favorite things as a kid. Puzzles and Legos. I liked putting stuff together. So that is just not even related to the symbolic act of it. All right. So the next is, have you ever felt like you were discriminated against in the workplace, community, or school? And what are some of the examples you've encountered? So for me, yes, I have been discriminated against. I remember one of my, places where I did one of my internships was found out that I needed some accommodations, which was basically just I needed breaks and assistance with some of the physical tasks. but they were afraid of the fact that I had autism and like didn't let me work with patients at all. And in fact, had me stay in other rooms. Even though I'd never even, and that was from day one, they didn't really, give me a chance before they just isolated me to another room. And frequently people like will underestimate me or, not as much anymore, but when I was younger, they would talk to me like I was a baby or, I had a behaviorist in one of our sites who was really afraid of me and would be like, nice hands, Kelly, nice hands. And, I had people, be like, oh, do you want a Skittle? And like gave it to me, but talking to me like a baby. So I've definitely seen it a lot throughout, not just school, but the work, in my adult life. Examples of different times I've been discriminated against because of autism. What about you, Thomas? Have you been discriminated against because you were autistic in either school or work?
At school, every single day, no matter where I went, I was always a target for someone's cruel amusement. I was picked on, teased, humiliated, sometimes maybe beat up. And it was just hard for me to find what I was find any happiness or maybe what I wanted to do with my life. All I wanted was for the hurting to stop. And the teachers, they tell me to keep just ignore it. But I couldn't. It was too much. It was every day. And it caused me to stress eat a lot too. So I didn't exactly have a happy youth because of my autism. And it's difficult when there's not a teacher around to take care of the problem right away or to really get strict or really to get deliver the message to the thug bully that it's not going to be tolerated. I kind of had a negative childhood growing up.
All right, thanks, Thomas. Stephen?
Yeah, I had many instances. I remember in 5th grade, they were not or actually 4th grade, they would not let me go on the overnight field trip the other 4th graders were going on. And my mom had to threaten have them threaten the school with legal action. And my dad, being a TV news director, eventually made them change their mind. There were many times where I was excluded from things. There were many times where I was bullied. There were many times where I was chosen last on the playground and very few invited me to their houses. The special ed classes they put me in when I was younger had inferior curriculum, and then I had to advocate my way out of there finally in 5th grade. But I ended up going on to college after there finally through middle school. And it's almost like I had to advocate my whole way from the oppression of the system and to get where I am today, which is a PhD student at Chapman. And even when I was very, very little, they told my mom I should be locked in an institution. Little did that doctor know that I would end up at Chapman going for my doctorate on a scholarship. So really, what we need to do is to stop the disability oppression and instead let people have a good pathway through the system to make the next generation easier and learn from the past of not just train people with disabilities for the lowest paid occupations in this world and on a pipeline, but instead let their talent shine in the school and the workforce.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I agree with everything you just said. So we really need to move towards, acceptance of all people. Bill, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll go ahead. I think for me, in my career as an OT, I guess I have some context too. So I was diagnosed late. So I was diagnosed at 25. So I definitely do not have any recollection of any childhood experiences. So for me, I think right now my career is like, I'm almost the go-to person whenever there is an OT program director or field coordinator, they realize that they have an autistic student. So they pretty much automatically send the student my way when they realize like, hey, you know what? This student can need some additional help. It seems like I'm the go-to person because like I'm the poster child of what I've done. I guess it's a different form of like discrimination, I guess. It's like, hey, how come it's always me being the go-to person to help these students with these issues, So I think there's that part. And then I think I definitely have to work really hard over time too, to sort of prove my competence in many aspects, whether it's my work or in leadership as well. I think that sometimes I know that one of my aspirations is actually to teach at an OT program. But so far, I guess it's like, because of the fact that it's like, I don't give the most A+ interviews. So therefore, I think that I put myself at a disadvantage sometimes.
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. Nick said he does not feel discriminated because of his autism, but he does see some people toss the word around as a joke, like autism, like autistic means retarded. And then up above, he said something that also related, that said that he was bullied in school, but not because he was autistic. It was because he was not very social and always by himself. He said one major flaw he has being autistic was that he was not very sociable and had trouble making friends. And another challenge was that he would overthink single thing of the past events and would just eat away at his mind. So it sounds like a lot of anxiety, Nick, type things. And then I think those are all from Nick on that issue. All right. So, the next question is, how can people and society support your differences best? And what do you wish that the public understood about autism? I guess, how could society support my differences best? Really just not being judgmental, not underestimating, and provide, sometimes I need a little bit more time to process or a little bit more time to do something. And, because of that, people just will oftentimes like talk to the person next to me. Or when I was younger, it would often be like, if I was with my parents or my sister, they would talk to them instead of me. When really I could have done everything. It was just providing the chance for me, like just give me the opportunity. And also like just respect some of the sensory differences. Like if I said things were too loud, like take me for my word for it. I wasn't trying to be difficult or something. It was just so painful to be around some stimuli. And I wasn't just trying to make things difficult by not eating certain foods or by, refusing to go on an elevator. It was just that all that stuff was so hard for me that I just couldn't cope with it. So, Thomas, how do you think that society can support your differences, and what do you wish the public understood about autism?
Well, everyone in autism has has a very heightened talent of some sort, an ability. They just have to take the time to figure it out and see how it goes. Sometimes you'll have to observe them without them even knowing. I mean, for one example, there's a movie called The Wizard. It's about an autistic kid who, with his non-autistic elder brother, was taking him to California, and they found out he had a very unique talent for video games and getting a high score, especially at arcade machines. That's one way to describe it. And then there was another movie that about another autistic child who was kind of good at science. I don't remember the title. And then there's another foreign film called Chocolate or something. It's about an autistic girl who knows how to, who can watch a martial art movement and imitate it. So what I'm saying is every autistic person has a hidden talent, and that people just need to take the time to find it and figure out how to best help them take it further, see what it could be used for society and all that. And it's true, we may have a very delicate comfort zone, and we do need to learn to get out of it. I mean, I was pushed out of my comfort zone a lot at JDS when getting used to some things. But the thing is, like a workout routine, you got to do it in moderation when helping autistic people get out of their comfort zones and handle changes that they don't like. So we're all good at something. You just need to be patient and figure it out.
Thanks, Thomas. Stephen?
Yeah, I think that the world can do a lot. And I think one thing is, again, we have to expand on a person's talents. I agree with what previous presenter said on that. But we need to also look at making things comfortable for the person. And the other thing, socially, I'll speak to this, my own recommendations here. I know there's a lot of debate between masking and stuff in social skills, but on the other hand, I also think there are times where I was what I called a social beginner, in which there were many activities I didn't know what to do. And I think the lack of first person voice was very thing, because they give the test to my parents and it didn't cover the skill set. Like there were a lot of things like I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know when to clap. If I would have known some of those things of what I was supposed to do, it would have really helped. The other thing I think is academically, we need to give people the best opportunities possible based on their abilities. And I also think society needs to overhaul the life after high school transition system, because right now we have it set up for a culture of group homes, entry-level jobs, and very small number of occupations. Why can't we unlock the person's talents and use that across the workforce and a much more diverse range of career paths, preferably things that earn a living wage, and redesign the system for community life as a preference, with supported decision-making over instead of guardianship, with community life in the community, and being able to people with disabilities to end up in relationships as they grow up. So why couldn't we redesign that using a person's talent, strengths, interests, gifts, and assets across the workforce?
I agree, Stephen. So many times we're like pigeonholed into one particular job or one particular task, and not given opportunities to pursue, our own interests and strengths in the workforce.
I just want to say that the whole system, I think, is going to the wrecking ball, because when you look at how many of those entry-level jobs are going away, you look at how many stores are closing, you look at how many fast food restaurants are eventually going into robotics, you look at the cost of living gone through the roof. So I think the whole system's going to be going through a transition of its own and redesigned in the upcoming years.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Stephen. Bill.
Yeah, I think Kelly, you mentioned earlier, I think that was valid. And to Stephen's point, I don't know if you all heard of B3 Coffee. So B3 Coffee is a nonprofit organization that is run in the East Coast, and the two founders are actually autistic new grads OTs, and they are definitely. I think we need something like that more in the communities across the globe, because I know that they are doing a lot of good work in terms of providing opportunities for many different types of differently abled individuals, not just autistic folks. I think that their example is an inspiration to all of us. And I know that I actually, from a bias standpoint, I actually heard them present on their work last month. And I know that one of the dreams is actually to run this charity full time.
Oh, that's awesome. I haven't actually heard about them. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Bill. And Nick, he says he agrees with everything. He says the public needs to have a system that will help people succeed in life. And, we know that it's beyond just the workforce, right? It's, socially, it's leisurely, it's housing. There's so many areas that we're still needing improvement in. So our next question is what is your greatest achievement so far, and what are your goals for the future? So my greatest achievement so far, I mean, I actually I wasn't sure that I'd ever be able to live alone. And then after my mom passed away, like I was so anxious because I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, am I going to be able to pay my bills and organize everything and figure everything out? And do I have the executive functioning skills to do this? So it was a lot of anxiety for me. But I would say that living on my own and just kind of navigating life, and doing what I want with my life is really kind of the biggest achievement. Helping others and, finishing school and stuff, of course, but just being able to be independent is what I enjoy the most. And what are my goals for the future? Right now I'm finishing the assistive technology program in the next couple of weeks, and I'll be testing for that. And really my goal is to really provide communication for individuals who haven't been able to have verbal output at this point. There's still so many people who are underestimated and don't have a form of communication, who can communicate but just aren't given the opportunities. And I hope to change that for what individuals I can. So Thomas, what are your greatest achievements so far, and what are your goals for the future?
Well, right now, one of my recent achievements, to be honest, is during a last year's DigiFest, I won an honorary mention award for my video. That was kind of a PSA project I did at this studio, which was like a Three Stooges seatbelt PSA. You can find it on SOI on the YouTube channel. And as far as anything before that, I was mentioned in the Valley newspaper about something called Child with Autism Finds Martial Arts Beneficial. Apparently somebody came to a talent show at an autism group a long time ago and saw me do a talent demonstrating swordsmanship, Japanese swordsmanship. And I got mentioned in the Valley newspaper.
I remember that. That was so cool, Thomas. That was a good day. Stephen.
Yes, I'd like to say some of my goals for the future. I'm considering several options. I'm debating whether I'm going to go into nonprofit or government or academia or somewhere in between. I don't know exactly what, or policy in the disability field or something. Once I get my PhD, my number one priority right now is to finish my PhD and then to go on with life from there. Also, another priority is to find the right person and hopefully fall in love with somebody, because I've been through so lonely for so long, and then I realized the thing, and that was something else they forgot to address when I was younger. I'm still 44 and still single. I'm not soliciting anybody on the conference call. I'm just expressing that that's one of my goals in life. That's all I'm expressing. But I think that that's something the disability system should do more about in the transition phase in the future.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Bill?
I guess that's my turn. I think earlier in the introduction,
Yeah,
I
it's your
think
turn.
that
Yeah.
I mentioned that now I have 3 TEDx talks as a speaker. I think that is definitely, I know that's an accomplishment for my part. And of course, aside from being an OT, having a license to practice, I think that is an accomplishment. For me, what I want to do in the near future, I think also they alluded it earlier too. I definitely want to teach full time instead of an adjunct in a master's of OT program or an entry level OTD program.
Awesome. What were your TED Talks about?
Okay, cool. So one is how autistic individuals can overcome their problems. That's more of the autism one. The second one is not an autism one. That one was about like aging in place and my reflections working in a sniff. But obviously that's the one I would say that's my least favorite. The third one, unfortunately, is still not published, but I know I did it. It's on how people with different disabilities, they transition from self-acceptance to self-empowerment.
Oh, awesome. That sounded awesome, Bill. All right. And then Nick said his greatest achievement was being able to get a job by himself and being able to keep it. Getting his associate's degree was also a big achievement to him, which leads him to his future goal, which is landing a job in the music industry, since he likes to make music. Okay, so that was the last of our pre-written questions. So now we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. Beth, were there any that we missed in the chat so far?
There was one that I saw, and before I forget, you guys did such an amazing job. I always learn so much more, and I think this is why it's my favorite presentation, because you guys are all the real experts. So thank you for sharing all your experience. I know somebody had written about bullied in school, and I wondered, there was something about what would you recommend? Oh, here it is. How can we teach general ed students to interact with special needs kids? What suggestions do you have?
That's hard.
Go ahead, Thomas.
That's kind of hard to do, especially when they're trying to learn to be a little more independent. But I guess for the start off, one was I had an aide through some of the school time, although I've been switched around by them a few times too. But I guess one thing's for certain, that sometimes you just need maybe an aide should be a little different, like sort of shadow them, but try to not be standing right next to them all the time, because they need to learn how to handle themselves. But at the same time, but they have to at least be able to observe them and know when they need to interact or get involved. So an aid would be a starting point for one thing.
Yeah, so I've worked in the school system for the last 20 it's 20 something years. And really the from both personal experience and professional experience, what seems to be the best is, so much of our time and resources is focusing on teaching people with autism to be more like neurotypical people, understand neurotypical people, but there is not any effort in teaching neurotypical people to interact with neurodivergent people. That it just, there isn't a curriculum to do that, right? So a lot of times, even if the autistic person does everything, so quote unquote right, you'll still see, the kids go up and be like, oh, can I play? And they're doing everything appropriately, but because they're different, the neurotypical child still runs away and still is fearful and still doesn't interact, even though all the skills were put into place for the child with autism to do the neurotypical things, right? So we know that it's much more than just teaching the skills for the neurotypical world, because sometimes all the skills are in place and it still doesn't work for the interaction.
Yeah, I agree with that standpoint, actually. So I know I actually have a very different type of childhood growing up, because I grew up in a different country. So for me, actually, I have a very different experience in terms of having recess. So instead, like, I know in the public schools around here is like there's like a yard supervisor or some sort of adult presence to supervise recess. The recess that I had experienced in my childhood, they were actually supervised by older elementary school students. Yeah, believe it or not, So I think that one of the things that I guess is like in this kind of situation, I know the environment is very important. Who knows? Maybe like whoever are supervising the recess, since this is a common time for kids to play, maybe they should be equipped with some skills to actually help the child to participate in the playing activity, especially if the autistic child is asking nicely.
Yeah. So for several years in a row, in April we did for one of our main sites that has around, I would say around 80 kids with autism at it, we would do a giant assembly every April. And during that, we would talk about, what is autism, but also like we would, do things like have the kids do like hands-on activities to understand like what does, sensory difference mean? What does it mean to have fine motor skills? Like we'd have them put socks on their hand and try to bead things, or, we would read something during an assembly and blow air horns every few seconds so that the kids understood what the sudden noise, startle was like. So what, and then we would talk about like, this is why the kids cover their ears. And then we would have kids come up and we would demonstrate like pressure weighted vests, and we would have them interact with AAC devices. And we just did everything so that they were familiar with all these things. And that seemed to really help the kids want to interact with the kids with autism. They finally understood some of the things they were doing, and they finally understood some of the equipment that was with them. And that seemed to really be the best thing, like just educating kids and talking about, that it's not a difference, or not bad, it's just a difference, and this is why we do it, and that I really think just being open with kids are way easier to teach than adults are about difference. It's much easier to get a kid
To say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a little bit to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Well, I believe that everything Kelly said about what they call ability awareness days, where people learn about this stuff. I also wanted to say, I also think that sometimes educating the normal kids about understanding this is good, and that's important that they adapt to, which is very common belief in neurodiversity. There's also other times where sometimes an autistic kid, if they don't understand something, like for example, let's say they're at a recess, but they don't have knowledge of any of the games, for example, or how to play the games. It's both neurotypical adapting, and there's times where sometimes the issue is a knowledge or a beginner at knowing what to do. For example, there were several cases where I didn't know how to play the games, but after I learned them, it made it a lot more fun because I learned how to play. And there were other times, like when I learned what student government did, or for example, in high school, I didn't know how to dance to go to school dance, because why? Nobody taught me how to dance. But once I learned dancing, I realized a lot of these things are fun. So sometimes you really have to get the voice, the autistic, in terms of their knowledge of things, which is not necessarily a parent's opinion on a survey. A lot of behavior scale tests that they use for socialization don't cover the right things. And that was another finding of my research, actually. But it was really interesting that people need to understand the different activities, like some things that are not as obvious, like when to clap in an audience, or how to ask someone out, or how to maintain a friendship, or even know you're supposed to invite people from your house, something I didn't know, and they always taught me, don't talk to strangers. And I took that so literally. I thought the other kids were strangers. I even resented going into taxi cabs in New York as a kid, because why? I was taught not to go in a stranger's car. So again, we have to teach people the subtleties about what is acceptable, and it's not always cut and dry. A lot of it is specific to the settings.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh
That's
yeah,
where
that
Oh,
as
go
well.
ahead.
So I liked what Steven mentioned earlier. So for me, one of my favorite things is to travel. So I realized that I know in the early days of travel, we don't really have Uber or Lyft. So I think that's one of the things that I definitely have to learn as well. So I know I have definitely heard that is like when you are in an Uber or a Lyft, it's like, unless you're super tired, you cannot really just sit there and not interact with the driver. sometimes, because sometimes it's like, hey, you know what? It's like you definitely don't want a bad rating on your Uber or Lyft app, so to speak. You know, so it's almost like, yeah. So it's like that's something that is important. I think it's important to know in today's context. And then speaking of navigating transportation, for sure, I know that I think for me, I guess it's like I actually had not. I would say the first time I traveled alone was when I was 21. But I guess it's like since I got into OT school, I realized that it's like, hey, you know, it seems like there are many cool activities, but then I realized that, hey, you know what, I gotta be more independent so that I can go out and experience these things. I know that I cannot always bring my folks, not because it's more expensive, but it's just that it's like, hey, you know what? I realized that it's like, hey, I might be more restricted because like, hey, I had to be considerate that because my folks are actually watching over me versus like I'm traveling by myself. And
Yeah.
speaking of strangers part, I actually have an adventure. I want to go very briefly here. So actually I traveled cross country in the UK. And the kicker is that for most of the time, I stayed at hosts where I only interact with them on Twitter. And that was definitely a unique experience in itself. Because it's like, yeah, I think it's like I may know what their face look like, but I don't know how tall they are, what do they sound like, that kind of stuff. So that was definitely a challenge. And then of course to navigate a different country while I'm at it, I would say that was probably the bravest things I've ever done.
Good job. I love traveling too, and it is scary when you first start by yourself. So, were there other questions, Beth?
There is. So kind of on the same conversation you're having, what is the most important advice you can tell parents, especially when it comes to helping their children be independent?
Well, so both from like personally, my parents like would teach me everything. Like my parents were like always like, okay, like here's how to pull the towel. And of course, I didn't have like the skills to do it, but they would just show me step by step what we call like in the OT world, like task analysis. My parents just naturally knew how to do that. And you know, of course I didn't do it right. You know, my mom still needed to redo things when I was done, but they always gave me the opportunity to practice these skills. And step by step, like they knew when it was too much for me, but they also didn't baby me. So, you know, she's like, okay, like I think I usually give the example when I'm speaking about like the time I got my TB test. So I was in my early 20s and had 2 jobs, and I had to submit my TB test to both places. So I got my TB test and I gave it to my first company, but I gave them my only copy, and so I didn't have a second copy. And for me, the idea of having to go back in, my mom would say like, oh, you gave your other copy away, so we need to go get another one from the doctor. And I was like, no, I don't want to go ask them for a TB test. I'll just get another TB test. I'll just go to a different clinic and get a TB test done again. And she's like, no, Kelly, that's ridiculous. You already had a TB test done. You can just literally walk in and just ask them for a printout. And I was like, no. And I was like crying, and like it was so much because for me, I hadn't ever done that before versus I had done the TB test. I knew that you go into the doctors and they inject the bubble and then you go back. But I'd never gone in and asked for a printout at the doctor's. So that was more overwhelming to me. And I was crying, and like for a week I was like protesting, and my mom would like go over it and she's like, okay, all you have to do is walk in and you're going to stand in line. And when you get to the counter, you're going to say, hi, I was here last week for a TB test. Can I need a copy of that. Can you please print it out? And, you know, of course I was like crying and like biting myself and like all these different things like all week long because I was so anxious about it. Well, she's like, okay, on Monday we're going to do it. So Monday comes and, you know, I'm so stressed and so anxious. And I go there and, you know, she drove me there, but she waited in the parking lot and she's like, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to walk in and stand in line. And she could have gone and stood there with me, but she knew that I would like fall back on her and I wouldn't ask. So she waited in the car, you know, prepped me with the steps. So I went in and asked, And I'm in line, get to the counter, ask the lady, I say, I need a printout of that. And then she was like, okay. And she printed it out and handed it to me. And I remember I was so proud, and it was like the happiest day of my life, because I achieved this, and I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad, but it took a lot of prep and a lot of practice, but I was able to get those skills. So, push your child to what that they can do, but also don't push them so hard that they can't do it. Have realistic expectations, and teach small increments. Don't do it all at once.
Join in on this. And one of the, can I join in?
Yeah.
One of the things about being independent is, and I'm also going to answer Jennifer Hammer's question as well about, and all brave and turning 18 and she's lost. I'm going to give you some advice here. One of the first things is parents need to take an empathetic view of their person with a disability trying things that are more grown up. That may mean things like learning to cook on the stove. It might mean learning to do your own laundry. It might mean going places in public on your own. It might mean learning how to clean house. It might mean learning to drive the car. It might mean learning to go to work. It might mean learning how to shower by yourself. It might mean turning on the hot water. It might mean learning how to go to the store by yourself. It might mean having things in your own name. It might bills in your own name and learning how to pay them. It might mean establishing credit. It might mean learning to having someday owning an asset. It might mean branching out in a little bit of teenage rebellion or early 20s rebellion. It might mean learning how to make decisions to support a decision making and being independent. It might mean doing things on your own. It might mean learning to use some power tools. It might mean learning to do things that were historically shielded for people with disabilities and trying new things and learning how to do them the correct way. And really means like, it also means not treating adults with disabilities as babies. Eventually, parents are going to pass away. Eventually, people with disabilities might go on to make decisions in their own lives. It might mean them dating or be getting into a relationship or learn how to make an advance to somebody the correct way. It might mean being able to learn how to get connected with their communities on their own. And it
I agree, Stephen. There's so many different skills to teach, and I think the most important thing is like you have to start young. It could be as much as have your 4 or 5-year-old throw things in the trash when they're done. You're not going to suddenly teach independent living skills when your child turns 18. You're going to slowly prep them. And it may be with a lot of support from you, a lot of visuals or a lot of modifications to the task, but you're going to start teaching the individual to care for themselves since they were young.
And it also is about prepping. One more thing, it also means about deciding where that person wants to take their adult life. Like what kind of career path do they want? What does it take to get there? Do they want to do any additional education beyond high school, like go to college or learn a trade or learn a career path or get a college degree or even go to graduate school? What are they good at? Where can their talents be used in the workforce? It's about what kind of life do they want? If they want to move out, where do they want to move? Do they want to stay in their own town or go somewhere else? Who might they want to live with at some point? Do they someday want a roommate or in a relationship, for example? What kinds of things they like to do for their free time? What kinds of support needs do they have? And those can be obtained through HCBS and through the regional center and stuff like that, but really need to start looking at all the possibilities and steering what's there and see what the person's dreams are, what the person likes in life, what kinds of life do they want? Do they want urban or rural? Do they someday want to move to another city? We need to start looking at the person's voice and planning their transition using person-centered planning.
Perfect. I love that, Stephen. Thanks.
All right.
Were there other questions? Oh,
I can tag on to too. So
go
I
ahead, Bill.
get me in terms of transitions. I actually like your advice too. I would add one more is that sometimes it's career centric. Sometimes I know that I think me being an OT and neither of my parents were in healthcare, So I think that I realized that it was very, very difficult initially to find a mentor. So I think that one thing that it really have done, I guess, is like, especially considering I found out my diagnosis at such a late age, I guess that's sort of a mentality to sort of go down swinging. But that said, I also know that mentorship sometimes is a very professional field like OT. Sometimes like parents might not be enough. Sometimes maybe I guess in this case, because of OT, right? So you talk about like a specific trait. So I guess the faculty would be very important as well. So other people who are supporting your journey is also very important, because I know earlier I talked about the discrimination examples, like, oh, I'm always the poster child of these autistic OT students getting referred to me. It's like, well, like that case is like, hey, these were the support person of these folks, if these support persons won't know, that's like, oh, I don't know anybody. I don't know how to help you. Sometimes that could be, you leave like a person in no man's land, so to speak. And I think that's the reason why I started to give back, because I realized that like, hey, you know what? There may be folks like myself, might be earlier on in their journeys, they might need some lift in their careers. So maybe that's the difference between like they're making it or they have to go out to pursue another career. I think that is important. And then in terms of transition, I agree with the person-centered planning. I think I know actually I recently published a peer-reviewed journal article on this. I think it's like having mentors from a very similar wavelength. I think that is very important as well, especially if it's like a very specific career that not many autistic folks enter.
Yeah, I agree. If I would have had a field work coordinator with autism, it would have made life so much easier. Having representation matters, right? It just does. You want to see people like you in the places you are trying to be. So, were there other questions, Beth?
There's a lot of questions, but let's sneak one more in. So this last question is, when you apply for a job, do you divulge your disability?
Oh,
What is divulge?
like tell them?
Hide it or it's either hide it or tell it. It's whether or not to tell it or not. But I would just say just reveal it, and so you're not gonna get in trouble just for hiding it. Honesty is important.
Yeah. I'm currently using the Zoom app on my phone, and it runs a lot faster too. My laptop is like on its last legs, so that's why I couldn't hear. But the app is a lot smoother too, so hopefully y'all all
Yeah,
hear
we
me
can, we
much
can
better
hear
this
you
time.
great.
That's
Yeah, we
great.
can hear you.
That's the app. As for that question, whenever I apply for jobs online, they would have a section that asks if you have a disability, and autism is one of the choices. I would pick that choice because I figured it would help me like not only land a job quicker, but the employer will know that, and they would understand I'm on the spectrum, and that they would help me do a good job on whatever tasks that need to be done. So they aren't expecting too much of me, for lack of a better word.
For me, as I get older, it's harder to tell now. I'm on the spectrum, but when I was younger, like there was no way to hide it. There was no masking. I was constantly like, melting down and having behaviors and stuff. So it was essential that I tell the employer in order to get the accommodations in place. It does come kind of like with my field work, though. It does come with some double-edged swords, because sometimes people will, I know they're not supposed to, but they'll exclude you or not hire you or whatever it may be because, you may have a disability. But, always getting what you need in place is essential too, in the perfect world, you could tell people and they wouldn't discriminate against you, but it's not always perfect. So I would say, like, you wouldn't necessarily want to work for a place that's going to discriminate against you anyway, right?
Yeah, general.
That's not the company you're going to want to be with.
Oh yeah, that's like common courtesy, because you want to work with someone that you'll be okay with working with, not the other way around.
Yeah. Bill, were you going to say something?
Sure, I'll go. So I guess it's like, if it is an educational setting, I think that it's almost like OT is just a small world. So whether I disclose or not, it really does not make a difference. But I think that if it's in a classroom in OT school per se, if I do a guest lecture, that's given. I have to, because that's the selling point of the lecture, That's the selling lecture. So that's no point of hiding it. But if it's like a leadership class, I think that it sort of adds a little bit more context when I am the one who's lecturing, because that I think it actually sort of like gives some of the more timid students to realize, like, wow, like this guy actually worked really hard to be where he is today. So I think that it really has acted some context. And then in terms of clinically, I guess it depends. If I know that my safety is at risk, definitely I'll disclose it, especially like, the SNFs, it's like psych buildings, definitely I think it's important to disclose it, because like definitely I want to not only make myself safe, but also my patients safe. In terms of job interviews, for a clinical job, I would say, yeah, nowadays I think I probably would disclose it.
Yeah, I used to, because I work in the school system, and all of the classes I tend to serve have kids on the spectrum. So I used to do a lot of speaking and everybody knew, but there's a lot of turnover in the staff now. So I haven't told as many people. However, like, because I felt like a lot of times if I told them I had autism, then they didn't respect me professionally as much. But yet they were inspired and believed what I said. So it was kind of like this double-edged sword. So lately I've had some teachers that aren't necessarily buying into like some of the sensory strategies. So then I've ended up telling them that I have autism, and then, so it's kind of like, yeah, you just kind of have to see in the situation. It's like a give and take. Sometimes it makes it worse. Sometimes it makes it better.
I think that it's so sad that employers sadly still discriminate. I heard that from an HR person. I won't say the name, but I think that employers need to do less discrimination. And I know some employers are adapting. I've heard rumors that there's some that have changed their hiring not to focus on subtle cues, but instead to focus more on how the person can do a job. And the really was autistics tend to, there's a lot of workforce culture studies about this and among autistics, and it was really interesting that sometimes there's subtle things that someone doesn't always pick up, and which gets in trouble in the workforce sometimes. But one of the things I think employers is they need to start unlocking the talents of people with disabilities and using them across the workforce. And instead of focusing on what they can't do, look at what they can do. Where's their interests, their strengths, their gifts, their assets, their talents be best used, and then use that across the workforce. And the other thing I think is important is we have to diversify the jobs of people with disabilities, because right now a lot of the entry-level positions are going away. When you look at the number of store closures, you look at the number of dead malls. So a greater number need to start our transition system in our schools need to start training them for a much greater range of occupations.
Yeah, I agree, Stephen. Well, I just wanted to thank you guys. I know we're already out of time. I know there's a lot more questions, but we're closing up. So
There is. I know we could talk to you all day. Thank you each of you to, like I said, share your time and your experience with us and our families. And you guys are the leaders, and thank you for sharing your voice. It's an important voice. You are the experts, so we learn from you. So thank you all. I don't know if you can see the thank yous coming in from the chats, but our families appreciate it as well. So have a great evening, everybody. We'll be sending out the recording, and stay safe, take care, and hope to see you guys at our walk. Thank you so much,
Okay,
Gilbert.
thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Thank you.